There was a harpsichord sitting in the hall that we used to play every now and then. But there wasn't any communal music. There wasn't much singing along or stuff like that. I mean, it was my dad's job. So he had a study and he would be locked in that study, generally not making a noise, just, I suppose, just working on scores and things. And also, my dad's job seemed to involve more admin than music. So he always had an office in the house and with lots of office equipment. And he had a secretary, and you never heard any music coming out of the office. So you were more likely to hear music coming out of the living room with my mum playing a bit of light jazz or opera or something. I mean, we were taken to see classical concerts and operas and things when we were kids, which we hated, because they were terribly boring. But we were exposed to a lot of culture, a lot of, our mum was an actor, so we. By the time she had kids, she'd given up her career, but she still did quite a lot of sort of university acting and things. So we used to go and see her in plays quite a lot. So yeah, we were exposed to lots of stuff, but none of it ever felt particularly familial. If you compared me and my sister's upbringing to other people we knew, I mean, they were having, they were getting the guitars out after dinner, and they would have parties, and their neighbours and friends, parents' friends would come around and sing pop songs and things. We didn't have any of that. I was definitely encouraged, especially by Barbara, our mother. I mean, our dad wasn't around much. He was away a lot, working. But yes, there was certainly no discouragement from our father, and I got lots of encouragement from my mum. I used to discuss. I would come home from school really upset because somebody in my band had shown a lack of commitment, and my mum would talk me through it, the sort of pains of artistic collaboration and all that sort of stuff. We got really obsessed by Orange Juice and Joseph K. And I actually discovered some footage of a very, very early Amitri from when we were, like 15, 16. And it's horrendous because we're just aping the wee sort of moves of Orange Juice and Joseph K. It's incredibly embarrassing. They were obviously, we're desperate in love with these men that are 5 or 6 years older than us, and we kind of worship them, and we're just completely copying them.
Justin's childhood was steeped in culture, but not the type of music making that most people imagine. His father worked in music administration and his mother was an actress, and there were concerts and plays, but no family sing-alongs. From the start, he learned that art was work, not pastime. His mum also helped him through the early pains of band life, teaching him to think about collaboration seriously. And when he and his friends copied their heroes on stage, it was embarrassing but formative, the first step toward finding his own voice.
I read Sylvia Plath quite early, and I think that was probably quite a big influence. But I read Sylvia Plath because we had the books in the house, and Sylvia Plath's quite accessible when you're a teenager because it's incredibly angst-ridden. It really appeals. I mean, obviously things like Catcher in the Rye, and me and my sisters read quite a lot of Ted Hughes as well. Those books were hanging around, but mainly the impetus to write lyrics was just turning on the John Peel show and hearing bands sing about things that you wouldn't expect rock bands to sing about. Singing about, I don't know, being on the dole, or singing about writing love songs in quirky, new, original ways, writing political songs. The punk and post-punk and new wave, lyrically everything got kind of blown wide open. I mean, prior to that, it was all glam rock and prog rock in my world, and the lyrics in prog rock are just really awful. They're incredibly obscure and very hard to relate to. They tend to mainly involve sort of dragons and pirates and things. So again, just listening to punk rock really allowed you to think, oh, I could do this. I could write a daft love song. I came from an incredibly privileged background in that I had a very, very understanding parents. Went to a very sort of not a private school, but to all intents and purposes, it may as well have been a private school. It had a private school ethos. I mean, it wasn't fee paying, but it may as well have been. It was a fucking hideous place, but not in any way School of Hard Knocks or rough. So there was no, my life's trajectory was going to be go to university, do an arts degree, and I don't know, fuck knows what the trajectory was after that, but certainly go to university for 3 or 4 years. And what the music thing did was just completely change that direction. And fun enough, you're talking about this sort of political culture at the time. You got that kind of really sort of entrenched late 70s, unreconstructed sexism and racism, as you're saying. And then you had the Thatcher Revolution, which created a sort of, in my world, created a sort of mild, disdainful form of protest, but not real protest. There wasn't real anger. We sort of sneered at it. We did absolutely fuck all about it. But because of Thatcher's sort of drive to make everybody an entrepreneur, there were schemes available that meant you could leave school and sign on to a yacht scheme or something and get a bit of money every week that would pay for rehearsals. So actually, ironically, and I know Alan McGee from Creation said this, ironically, the early period of the Thatcher government was really beneficial to people like us that wanted to go arty and wanted to go and just sign on and not be hassled into some shitty job and just rehearse as much as we could. And effectively, that was the kind of making of us. Once Ian joined, we tried to be a cross between television and Captain Beefheart. We didn't sound like that at all, but that's what we were aiming for in terms of the guitar arrangements. We didn't want any chords. We wanted all the guitars to be single lines or maybe arpeggiated lines. And wanted to sort of fit those together with very melodic bass and quite strange drums. We were really obsessed with the first Feelies album as well. That was a big influence. Though they did use a lot of chords, unlike Captain Beefheart. But yeah, we were obsessed by Beefheart, the Feelies television, and obsessed with writing songs in a collective way, writing songs with all 4 members contributing. I suppose I was kind of the ringmaster in that we would come in and I would just point at one of the guitar players and say, just play something, every day. So there was a lot of kind of jamming around little loops of guitar figures. And then we would try and mash things together. Oh, that doesn't work. That's the wrong key. Oh, that doesn't work. That's the wrong tempo. And eventually we'd find all these bits that we'd worked on and come up with parts for, based on something that one of the guitar players had played. We would sort of fit those together, make some kind of structure that I would record on cassette, and then I would take that home and write a bunch of words over the top, and then come back in and maybe dick around a bit with the structure, but not much. But that literally took 2 or 3 months per song. It was an incredibly labor-intensive way of doing things. I mean, the end result was we got the first album. I listen to it now, and in spite of lots of things that are very embarrassing about it, musically it's very dense and complicated, and I think it's quite original, in its own way, because it really is constructed in quite an arty way. It's kind of a patchwork thing, and eventually that became so painful and time-consuming that Ian suggested that we tried writing in a different way, and he just said, "Look, why don't we just write things separately?" And that ended up being a big change.
As a teenager, Justin found his voice through words and punk. Reading Sylvia Plath and Ted Hughes gave him a taste for honesty and intensity, while punk rock, filtered through John Peel's show, showed him that lyrics could be about everyday life, dole cues, politics. He came from privilege and admits it openly, but music became the great diversion, pulling him away from comfortable academic future. His path was now obsession, not convention.
We had very low expectations commercially because we were signed to an indie offshoot of Christus called Big Star. One of these pseudo indie labels that all the major labels launched in the early 80s. So, and we weren't given a huge amount of money. We were given 25,000 quid, which was enough to put us on wages. Allowed us to go full time, allowed us to buy a bit of gear, and it would, that money probably lasted us like a year and a half or something. But there was no commercial pressure from Christus because we were on this indie label. But I guess the expectation from the label was, maybe they'll get into the indie chart and one of the singles will be in the top 10 of the indie singles chart or something, or maybe they'll get a good review. But this rather odd thing happened after we signed to Christus. We were just getting on with making the first album. We were quite well thought of in the weekly music press. The Enemy, Melody Maker and Sounds covered us favourably because we were part of that postcard scene, And we were getting better. We were starting to do some quite interesting things, I think. But then what happened was our manager managed to get the attention of the editor of Melody Maker, a guy called Ian Pye, to get interested in what we were doing at Christus. So she sent him the first three songs that we'd recorded. They were unmixed, I remember. They'd been recorded for the first album. So she sent Ian Pye these songs and he went apeshit about them. And then, kind of off his own back, put us on the cover of Melody Maker before we released anything. We'd released one indie single like a year and a half before or something, or a year before. So all of a sudden we were being touted by the Melody Maker as the future of British indie pop. We ended up not releasing anything for like 6 months or something, by which time there'd been a huge backlash because the other music papers, who to a certain extent were more influential, actually, Sounds and the Enemy, thought, well, who the fuck are these guys? They put one single, the Melody Maker put them in the cover with a centre spread article, and then they never put anything out. This is just fucking hype. So by the time the album came out, we were absolutely savaged by the Sounds and the Enemy. So that was game over. They took up the option on the second album, to our great surprise, because obviously the whole thing had been a huge commercial and critical failure, or not even a huge failure, just a failure. But then for some weird reason they took up the second option. I think because it was cheap to do. They only had to pay us a small amount of money to keep us on the label. And then we realised that they were going to sit on us and force us to write pop songs, which we couldn't do and weren't willing to do. And we realised that we were going to get into one of these awful traps that happens to an awful lot of bands, where they're still signed to the label, but the label won't let them record because they're not writing sufficiently commercial material. So the label won't spend any money in the recording studio on the artist, which should be illegal, but I think to this day it's not illegal. So our manager and us sort of staged a kind of sit-in in the offices, and we printed up these T-shirts saying "Release the Dells" to try and force them to drop us because we couldn't work. We couldn't. They wouldn't give us any money to do anything because they considered what we were doing uncommercial. So we tried to compromise, and we wrote a sort of pop song called "Tears and Trickery." And then they said, "Oh, that's quite good. Write us another 3 of those." And we said, "No, we're not doing that." We had $2,000 in the bank, which we spent on airfares. It was a big plan by Barbara Shores, our manager, who's an American woman who'd moved to the UK to make a postcard fanzine. She was obsessed with postcards, as a lot of Californians were in the early 80s. But she always had this dream of taking like a Scottish band to America and showing them America, which is what she did. So the plan was spend the last money we had on airfares, do a private party in New Jersey that was being put on by a big fan called Tim Hayland, I think. And that was going to raise a couple of $1,000, which would allow us to buy a van. And then we were going to go around staying in fans, in most cases, parents' houses, where they would put gigs on for us either in their aunt's house or in a record shop or in a local club that they'd hired. Because in the intervening years, we'd been writing to all these fans and kind of grooming them to help us. We would, could you put a gig on for us? Oh yeah, I'm having a 21st birthday party. Yeah, I'll rent a club in Orlando and we'll sell tickets and we'll give you the money. So that's how that worked. And it was budgeted, and it sort of depended on selling quite a lot of badges and T-shirts, and busking was quite a big part of it. So what happened when we got to the States was the guy who was having the private party, who said he was going to sell 200 tickets at $20 a head, he effectively had a nervous breakdown, partly because there was 10 of us sleeping on his living room floor in a small apartment in Jersey Heights. That didn't help. But he hadn't sold the tickets that he claimed that he'd sold. So he didn't have any money for us. He just had a couple $100. So then we had to start phoning other fans that we'd been in touch with, saying, could they lend us stuff? It was our backpacking year out, It was formative in the sense that it was extremely stressful psychologically because we were hungry all the time. We weren't getting enough sleep because we were just pulling over and sleeping in picnic rest areas because we didn't have money for any accommodation at all. We would get fed and watered when we were in a town where a fan was putting on a gig for us. So, their parents would open very generously and hospitably open the Frigidaires to us. So formative in that sense, it was kind of miraculous that we got round the whole circuit. Musically, it was a huge change because American audiences are wildly different from European audiences, and everything is a lot more showbiz. Everything's about performance and sort of showing off. And we learned really quickly to respond to that, because American audiences teach you that. They're extremely vocal. They'll tell you what bits they like, and then you just play up to that, and it becomes quite histrionic, but that's fun. That's really great fun. So it changes. In that 6-week tour, we went from being a very earnest, slightly shoegazy indie postcard band to being a rock band, with guitar solos. I mean, we didn't realize that we had guitar solos until these guys would go, "Ooh," and start clapping. We went to the States to achieve two things: to get round it in one piece and to come back with an indie record deal. And we'd set our sights on a label called Big Time in Los Angeles, which was just an indie record company. So we spoke to them when we were out there, and when we came back, they sent us a bit of money to do some demos. So we did a bunch of demos that I guess would have been probably, I suppose, would constitute the sort of second Amitri indie album. And we felt that if we could get through that experience, we could do anything. We really felt we could do anything because, I suppose, like the Beatles coming back from Hamburg, if they must have thought, if we can play like 12 hours a day, we can fucking do anything. If we can get these drunken sailors dancing, or stop them fighting. And if we can just improvise, daft bits of comedy, then, we can, if we can get through that, we can get through anything. And, sleeping on the fucking roadside and running away from electric storms and having band meetings at the Grand Canyon and being genuinely hungry for months at a time, you just think, fuck me, we did that, and it made us feel like we were better than anybody else, because nobody else had, as far as we knew, no other bands in our milieu had done anything like this. Then what happened after we got back was we did the Big Time demos, which were indie. They were probably a bit less indie than the first Christmas album, but not much. But then Ian and I started writing separate things that were very sort of mainstream and Americana. And then we started thinking, shit, these songs are really mainstream. Is there any point in putting mainstream songs out on a small label. So because our music just morphed quite quickly post the American trip into mainstream rock music, we very quickly went from focusing on getting a small deal and doing a small scale thing to thinking we should sign to another major label. You know, we've got the experience. We're writing pop songs. We should go for it. And so that was a complete shift of planning.
Amitri's early years were about experimentation, long rehearsals, complex songs stitched together like puzzles. That dedication to craft was impressive, but it slowed them down and left them vulnerable when hype from the press turned to backlash. Being touted as the next big thing and then torn apart left Justin wary of media attention. Yet out of that pain came change, a shift toward more direct songwriting and a realization that to survive, they needed to adapt.
We got radio play. So Kiss to Sing Goodbye, which came out, I think, in August 89, I think. It got a bit of Radio 1 play, certainly at night, but it got a lot of commercial radio play. So I would sit in my bedroom at night and tune to the stations, and I would hear it a lot. So that was super encouraging, and also it sounded really good in the radio. So that made us think, look, we've done the right thing here. We've made the right sort of records, because every time we heard those, sort of certainly Kiss to Sing Goodbye in the radio, it just leapt out because it wasn't soaked in all that 80s reverb like everything else was at the time. So we thought we might have a bit of a chance here. So we weren't distressed that the first two singles didn't get into the top 40. The absolute key in those days was you had to get into the top 40, because if you got into the top 40, you'd be on the television, you might get top of the pops, and then overnight you were a successful group, you know. Our thing was, because we'd been an arty indie band and then suddenly we'd started writing mainstream songs, we were very, we had commercial ambition for the songs, because we loved the songs. I mean, we loved Waking Hours, but we didn't think we could justify it unless it was in the charts. So it does. I mean, not because we wanted to be successful, but because the charts are where that shit belonged. You know, the first Amitri album didn't belong in the charts. It belonged in, you know, indie clubs and in polytechnics. You know, that's where that music sat. But because we'd written these fucking mainstream, slightly Americana things, they didn't make any sense outside of the mainstream. So we were really keen to have a hit. I mean, again, not for commercial reasons so much as the sort of creative sense that that's where that stuff belongs. You know, it belongs. You know, we want housewives who listen to Radio 2 to hear this stuff. We didn't want them to hear the old stuff because they wouldn't have understood it. You know, forgive the term housewife, but that was the thinking at the time. You know,
in terms of success, though, When Nothing Ever Happens came out, and it was massive, and MTV played it to death at that time,
right.
And I just wonder whether it changed your mentality in any way to have that success and to suddenly be recognizable. And to have that confirmation in some way.
Yeah. The validation was good because, you know, the incredible snobbery of the sort of hipper parts of the Glasgow music scene had always thumbed their nose at Amitri, which we took some pride in, but we took a hell of a lot more pride in beating them at their own game, which was, you know, being in the charts. So that was very... revenge is sweet. Revenge really is sweet, and I you know, don't let anybody tell you different. But other than that, I might be wrong. I don't think it had that much effect because we were so long in the tooth by that point. I mean, you know, I'd been in a band called Amitri since 1980, so it'd been at least 10 years of a young person's life that I'd been doing this, and then people were recognizing me in the street. So I think we found it was a bit odd, but we found it very amusing. Partly because it immediately made our lives easier. You know, we were playing nicer venues, we had nicer dressing rooms, we had a nicer van. What's not to love about that, you know? things are actually improving just in terms of the quality of our lives. The sort of fame aspect we dealt with immediately by nipping it in the buds. We didn't play up to it. We didn't glam up. We didn't start buying expensive clothes. We didn't move out of our flats in the middle of Glasgow. We didn't stop going to the pubs that we went to. We were just there, so that the slight weirdness of being known dissipated very quickly because we just didn't react to it. We just kind of ignored it. And Glasgow is quite a good place to be on the telly last night because people they'll be quite blunt with you, I tried to, the day after we were on Top of the Pops the first time, I tried to get on a bus just around the corner from my flat to go into town, and the bus driver said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm just going to town." He went, "Get the fuck." I said, "What do you mean? What do you mean?" He went, "You were on Top of the Pops last night. You're not getting the fucking bus." And he wouldn't let me on the bus.
By the time Amitri returned from America, they were a tougher, sharper band. Their songs now felt like they belonged on mainstream radio, and Justin saw no contradiction in that. It wasn't selling out, it was putting the songs where they deserved to be. When Nothing Ever Happens hit big, it was sweet revenge on the doubters back home. But fame never went to his head, success amused him, but it didn't change him. So by the time Justin Currie first appeared on that Top of the Pops episode, he was already fully formed. Culture at home had made him serious, punk had taught him honesty, and setbacks had made him cautious but resilient. Success, when it finally came, wasn't dazzling, it was vindication. He carried it lightly, grounded in Glasgow, with the same seriousness and pragmatism that had driven him from the start. Now, if you'd like to see the full interview, you can see it on screen here. And if you'd like to see part 2 of this Decoding the Interview, you can also click where you see the box.